This is the reading of Eldritch Toddler by halfagone milkywxy, read by Insect Overlord. This is for teen and up audiences, and the author specifically says, "Beware, this work includes some depictions of the Eldritch variety that some readers may find disturbing. It also includes armed robbers who wield guns, although the guns are not used against anyone at any point. One instance of explicit language. Please proceed with caution." This fic has roughly 7,500 words and will probably be split into multiple parts. Here's the summary. Bruce is not prepared for when John Constantine hands over a young boy who has been de-aged. While Constantine goes off in search of the one responsible, Bruce and his family are left to care for the child. Danny is a sweet kid. He isn't fussy either. This should be fine. They quickly learn to take Constantine's warnings seriously. When Bruce had opened the door to greet John Constantine, he had not expected to have a child suddenly thrust into his arms. He looked down at the boy, maybe 2 or 3 years old. The boy blinked back at him. Black hair, blue eyes. He looked back at Constantine with alarm. "He's not yours," Constantine reassured him, with a roll of his eyes. "He's a kid I work with. He's usually a teenager, but he got de-aged when he ran into this witch. Bruce sent Constantine a glare for his near mistake, propping the young boy on his hip. Strangely enough, the child didn't seem to mind being held by a stranger, happily clutching Bruce by the neck with his small little hands. So cute. Someone really needed to stop Bruce before he whipped out adoption papers again. "And you couldn't have left him with his parents?" Bruce asked curiously, even if he gently rubbed the soothing circles into the boy's back. He might not have had any of his children at this young of an age, but he dealt with a number of little ones like this in his line of work. He had an idea of what he should be doing. "His parents don't know he's a vigilante. I couldn't compromise him," Constantine explained, thankfully taking this seriously enough. "I would have left him with his sister, but she'd wring my neck for letting this happen to him, especially since he took the hit for me." Constantine grimaced slightly, before rubbing the child on the head. "This is Danny. He's a pretty happy kid, so long as you don't argue in front of him, or mention Christmas." Constantine mouthed the word so that Danny didn't have to hear it. "Are you going to be okay with Brucey?" Constantine asked Danny, leaning forward to look Danny in the eye. The boy bobbed his head in response. "And what did I say to do when you meet any strangers who give you the willies?" "Use your knees and elbows and don't bite them if they look dirty," Danny answered dutifully. "Very good," Constantine said with a satisfied nod. Meanwhile, Bruce shook his head, listening in on the conversation with disbelief. He turned back to Bruce, explaining, "I gotta find that lady that made him this way. I should be back in a day or 2, at most." "Aren't his parents going to worry about him?" Bruce asked skeptically, even as he let Danny rub his unshaven jaw. The boy looked awfully curious about it, and it wasn't bothering Bruce, so he let it slide. "Nah, they think he's with his sister," Constantine told him, waving his hand dismissively. "And his sister thinks he's with me. So as long as I can get this done in less than a week, we'll be fine. He doesn't remember much from his teenage years, but he does remember some things. So if he says anything particularly alarming, it's normal for him." Bruce frowned, suddenly discomforted. "Don't call me while I'm gone, though. You might catch me at the wrong time, and I probably won't answer anyways. But if at any point he grows an extra limb or eye, or starts sprouting tentacles, let me know." Bruce's eyes widened almost comically, while Constantine gave him a thumbs up and then disappeared, clearly having teleported straight from Bruce's front steps. Bruce turned back to the boy in his arms, who smiled brightly at him. "Hi," the boy said, now clutching onto Bruce's tie. "Hi," Bruce replied as he turned back to the manor, closing the door behind them. "Are you hungry? Is there any food you can't eat?" "Can I have mac and cheese?" Danny asked hopefully. Bruce smiled, despite his concerns surrounding Constantine's statement. "Sure, we can have that," Bruce agreed happily, leading them towards the kitchen. Surely Constantine was just exaggerating or messing with him. "Really? Another one, Bruce?" Jason snarked, with an openly disapproving look. Dickie had dragged them all out for some sibling bonding at the zoo. Jason hadn't had a good enough excuse to get out of it, so he had gone along. Begrudgingly, of course. But it had only been a few hours, and already they were back, and suddenly there was a new kid at the manor. "You seriously have a problem," Tim commented, as well before heading towards the refrigerator. "We've only been gone for a few hours, Bruce. You couldn't have missed us that much," Stephanie remarked as well, plopping down beside the kid's chair. "What's your name? Blink twice if you're being held against your will." "You're pretty," the boy told Stephanie guilelessly. Stephanie whipped her head in Bruce's direction. "He can stay." Jason snorted immediately at that, covering it up with a cough. He had a feeling that Dick noticed and didn't believe him for a second. Stupid older brothers. "New baby brother," Cass said brightly, happily patting the boy on the head with a smile. The kid kicked his feet, beaming like the sun at all the positive attention. "Figures. His name is Danny, and we can't keep him," Bruce informed them, far too amused. "He was de-aged while helping out Constantine, so John left him with me while he went out looking for the woman responsible." "Huh, okay." Jason supposed he could let it go then. He still didn't know why Constantine would have left him with Bruce of all people. The number of children must have tricked the man. "I didn't know Constantine was working with someone new," Dick commented, and then crouched down in front of the new kid, Danny. "Hi, Danny. I'm Dick. It's nice to meet you." Danny blinked at Dick with a bewildered expression. "That's a bad word." Chuckles went around the room. Dick shook his head amusedly. "Maybe, but it's my nickname. Is Danny your nickname?" Jason shook his head and left the room. He'd leave them to their play. He had better things to do than to get to know a kid who'd been out of their hair in a few days at most. Jason found himself taking back those words when he found the boy later that night, hunched in the corner by the stairs, looking round the large space anxiously. Everyone else had either gone out on patrol or sleep. Jason himself had just come back from a case after deciding to take it easy that night. He hadn't expected Danny to still be up. When he approached the boy, the kid snapped his head in his direction, eyes glowing green in the dim light. A very familiar green. Jason lifted his head in the air so that the boy could see him. "Hey, are you okay? Did you have a nightmare?" Jason asked the boy softly, lowering down into a crouch to look at him a little better. Danny bobbed his head, eyes watering as he tucked his knees close to his chest. The kid was so small. Were all kids this size? No. Jason had seen children even smaller in the Narrows due to malnourishment. Nonetheless, the sight tugged at Jason's heartstrings. He was a crime lord, not heartless. "Did you know what I do when I have a nightmare?" Jason quietly asked the boy, once he'd stepped closer without spooking him. Danny blinked up at him, and strangely enough, the green in his eyes had disappeared entirely. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, after all. "I read a good book." "Does it help?" Danny asked him, with all the innocence of a small child. Jason nodded. "Every time," he assured Danny, and hoped for dear life that it would work for the boy, too. Else the kid would lose his faith in humanity or something. Well, that might be a little too cynical. "Will you read to me, please? I don't know any good books," Danny asked him, tugging on his pant leg gently. His eyes were still watering, and they were just so big, and dang, why did he have to have such a heart? "Sure, kid," Jason murmured before picking the kid up and into his arms. Almost instantly, Jason felt his entire body freeze, an unfamiliar sensation warming in his chest and melting the tension in his shoulders. It flowed from his heart to the rest of his body, thrumming in his veins, and with every beat of his heart against his ribcage. He found himself clutching Danny tighter in his chest, while the boy clung on tighter as well. Danny tucked his face into the crook of Jason's neck, murmuring, "You feel familiar." "Yeah, you do too," Jason replied dazedly. He brought the boy to the library, holding Danny up with one hand while he grabbed an appropriate book with the other. The book he found might be above Danny's reading comprehension at this age, but the content should be fine. Jason carefully sat himself into a chair, tucking the blanket over Danny and himself, and only then did he start to read. It was hard for him to concentrate on the book, Jason had to admit, The strange warm sensation in his chest hadn't abated. Not that Jason minded. It was the calmest Jason had felt in years, and much as he hated to admit it, he didn't know what it was about the kid that made him feel that either. Maybe Danny was a meta? Jason wasn't quite sure how the meta gene worked either, of course, but considering Duke could enhance the abilities of other metas, maybe something about Danny could calm him too. Jason didn't know, but he appreciated it. In fact, he was so calm that he hardly even noticed when he dozed off with Danny in his arms, only moments after the boy had done the same. He didn't even dream. Jason woke up to the sound of a camera shutter going off, followed by a soft curse. Brows pinching, Jason slowly blinked his eyes open, only to find his obnoxious family gathering around in front of him, cooing and taking photos. He glared at them as darkly as he could, but it came off pretty weak, considering he still felt pretty relaxed with Danny in his arms. It made more than a few of them chuckle quietly, so he shut them up by flipping them the bird. That's what they get for waking him up. Damian didn't understand the fascination with this boy. He was hardly anything special. He was young, of course, but Damian had been much more capable at the same age. And yet, his siblings were all too busy spending time with him, even while knowing he would be returned to his correct age and brought home soon enough. Really, they were just wasting their time. It bothered Damian that they adored Daniel so much. He didn't understand why, either. Brown might call him jealous, but what was there to be jealous of? Sure, the boy had everyone's attention at the moment, but that hardly mattered in the larger scheme of things. They were all just fools to be bending over backwards for a small, innocent child. The boy had even managed to get Todd. Damian had assumed that he, at the very least, would have been on Damian's side on the matter. Alas, that did not seem to be the case. Damian supposed that, once again, he would have to be the logical one in the family. Even my katana could do better than that. Damian grumbled in displeasure as he lounged in the television room, watching some asinine and inaccurate cartoon with a few of his siblings surrounding him, with Daniel in tow. He got shushed by Gratian unsurprisingly. More surprisingly, however, was the way Daniel turned to Damian with stars in his eyes. "You have a sword?" Daniel gasped in amazement, propping himself up on his knees to get a better look at Damian. Honestly, Damian had not even expected the boy to know what a katana was. Damian puffed up his chest and began, "Well, this is a katana." Damian proudly presented one of his most precious weapons. They were now in Damian's bedroom, and so he could showcase his artillery to the curious young Daniel. Unfortunately, his family had followed them as well, no doubt to ensure that Damian didn't accidentally hurt Daniel, or something else ridiculous. Honestly, Damian had been wielding this weapon since he was Daniel's age. Nothing bad would happen. Notice the length and width of the blade. It is the most important and distinctive difference between its counterpart, the wakizashi. And he now unsheathed his wakizashi, holding them up side by side for Daniel to get a better comparison. This is a wakizashi. It can also be mistaken for the ko-katana. Now, to take careful note of this, Daniel. The younger boy nodded his head with a serious expression, keeping his attention solely on Damian. "Is this a show and tell or a seminar?" Damian heard Thomas ask Kane quietly, and chose to ignore him. "Is Danny a meta?" Jason asked Bruce, making the man blink in surprise. "I'm not sure, if I'm being honest," Bruce admitted thoughtfully, as he watched Danny marvel over Damian's swords. Thankfully, Damian didn't seem to be letting Danny actually hold any of them, or else they would have to step in. Constantine mentioned something strange. He told me to call him if Danny started growing any extra limbs or eyes or sprouting tentacles. Bruce glanced over at Jason, feeling a little lost. "Maybe he's worried about side effects?" Jason offered with a shrug. Bruce sighed. "Let's hope so. Why do you ask?" He calmed the pit-net madness. Jason informed Bruce. He had not been expecting that. "Yeah, I know, right? He didn't really do anything either. I just held him, and suddenly—" Jason trailed off, staring off at Danny with glazed eyes. "I felt better. I still feel calm, even now, but I can tell it's not the same." "We'll have to ask him about it, once his age has been reverted." Bruce said now, crossing his arms over his chest. Maybe if he's older, he'll know the reason for it. Jason grimaced slightly, but nodded his agreement. Danny asked, "Can I hold one?" That received a chorus of "No!" Danny wilted like a dried-out flower. How could you ever say no to that face? You couldn't, as it turned out. Why in the world did you buy him an astronaut suit? Bruce asked as he pinched the bridge of his nose. He couldn't be too upset either, of course, because Danny just looked so happy. The boy was running around in his brand-new astronaut costume, giddy as if he'd just eaten an entire cake. Bruce turned back to his son, responsible. Tim shrugged at Bruce. What? He said he wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up. Why not let him live his little baby dreams? Tim remarked at him with a grin, before turning his attention back to his camera. Smile for the camera, Danny. The boy did as asked, beaming so brightly it could rival the sun. Not even the little clear plastic shield that drooped down over his face could hinder Danny's natural glow. Bruce could already feel his resolve crumbling. Unfortunately, Bruce couldn't spend an entire day with his children. There was an important meeting he had to sit in on, and while he'd been able to do so from home through a video call, he still couldn't afford to miss it. His children did know about it, so as long as they kept Danny away and out of trouble, everything would be fine, which, of course, meant that it didn't happen. About halfway through his meeting, a door opened and closed in the study. He didn't peek over to look at who it was, since he didn't want to cause a distraction for anyone else on the call, since they could all see him clearly, even if they couldn't hear the door opening. That all changed when a little head of hair approached Bruce's desk. He'd seen it on the video before he noticed it in person. That's how quiet Danny was. Sharply, he looked down at the boy in surprise. Wordlessly, Danny reached his arms up, making grabby hands. Oh, did he want to be held? But Bruce had come to learn he couldn't deny Danny for very long, so he picked the boy up and rested him on his lap. He was careful to position the boy's face away from the camera so that no one could see and identify the child. The last thing he wanted was for Danny's parents to possibly find out about this and come asking Bruce questions he couldn't safely answer. Danny settled against Bruce's chest quickly enough, rubbing his face into Bruce's shoulder like a kitten before relaxing. A quick glance down at the boy told Bruce that Danny was beginning to nod off. Maybe all Danny needed was someone to cuddle with while he napped. Periodically, Bruce would rub the back of Danny's head, soothing the boy in his sleep. He turned down the volume so that it wouldn't easily wake Danny, and when it came his turn to present or discuss the data, he was careful not to speak too loudly either. If any of the stakeholders present noticed, they didn't feel the need to mention it. "You're trending," Barbara remarked when she came to visit them later that evening, handing her phone over to Bruce to show him the social media. Just as she said, he was trending #1 on the social media platform. A peek at some of the other tabs Bab had opened told Bruce a similar story. Somehow, a video had gotten leaked of the meeting, which wouldn't exactly be the first time. But now Bruce was especially glad he'd been careful about possibly showing Danny's face. Still, shots had been taken and spread around, the entire internet cooing over the scene and praising Bruce's parenting skills. Bruce already knew he would soon be getting a message from Lucius, remarking to him about the company's stock prices after that little scene. Unable to help his curiosity, Bruce watched the entirety of the clip that had been spread about. It was in part due to the fact he needed to be on top of everything. It started off right before Danny approached to enter the scene. Bruce watched as a little fluff of black hair appeared at Bruce's side. The camera had even managed to catch Danny's little hands poking into the frame, making the grabby motion. And then, of course, it showed Bruce picking Danny up and holding him in his arms. Bruce couldn't deny that the sight warmed his heart a little, even if it was him in the video. He hadn't gotten a chance to raise any of his children from a young age, not even Damian, his only child by blood. Seeing how he interacted with Danny, in hindsight, reassured a small part of Bruce that he kept in the back of his mind at times. Even if he had raised his children, he would have been able to figure it out. He could have still been a good father. Danny had an interesting reaction to Barbara. When he first saw her, he did a double take. At first, Bruce had been worried that Danny might think it strange that Barbara was in a wheelchair. Only Danny's words quickly changed Bruce's mind. "Jazzy?" Danny asked, cocking his head to the side like a curious, confused pup. "Hi, I'm Barbara." Babs greeted the boy kindly, smiling at him with a gentle, soft smile. "Who's Jazzy? Is that your sister?" Danny bobbed his head hesitantly, approaching Barbara. He seemed curious, but he also looked abashed by his mistake. "You look like her, but she has more dots," Danny explained, pointing to his cheeks. He must have meant freckles. It was only now that Danny seemed to notice the wheelchair. "What happened to your legs?" Danny didn't know the word for freckles, but he knew what a wheelchair was for. This spell was awfully strange. "There was an incident, but I make do with it these days," Barbara told him, to which he nodded in understanding, as much as he could understand at his age anyways. "I can do cool tricks with a chair, too." That caught Danny's interest. The boy perked up curiously. "You want to see?" "Yes, please," Danny requested politely. Barbara laughed. "Well, since you've been so nice, we can do this instead." Barbara picked Danny up gently, placing him in her lap. She carefully positioned herself away from any furniture, then spun herself around in a circle, making Danny squeal with joy and excitement. Now this, Bruce wished he could record. It was approaching the end of the day, too, with Danny in Wayne Manor. Still no word from Constantine. It was also around the same time things started to become strange. When Cass came up to him, Bruce had not been prepared to see her sign, "Danny is on the ceiling." Bruce didn't even know what that meant. Nonetheless, he followed his daughter to another room, where Danny was, in fact, on the ceiling. It was very reminiscent of a lizard, if Bruce had been honest. The boy was on his hands and knees on the ceiling, despite laying flat against the vaulted ceiling. There was no handholds on there. Bruce would know. How had Danny, is everything all right?" Bruce called out to the boy. He caught Danny's attention, and Bruce watched in quiet horror as the boy's head turned 180 degrees to face Bruce. Danny blinked once, twice, owlishly. Even from this distance, Bruce was willing to bet that his pupils were slits. "I'm fine," Danny told Bruce innocently, and then turned his head back around, much to Bruce's relief. Oddly enough, the boy began to wiggle in place. Bruce had no explanation for that. He turned back to Cass. "Can you give me my phone? I need to give Constantine a call." By the time Cass had retrieved his phone, a few of the other kids had begun to gather around and watch the show. Bruce looked over with slight disapproval as Stephanie brought out her phone and snapped a quick picture before pocketing it again. Did she want a souvenir or something? Bruce quickly dialed the number, waiting with some impatience as it rang. Thankfully, Constantine picked up after the second ring. "What do you want? I'm kind of in the middle of something here." The man yelped, and there was a sizzle in the background. "Danny is on the ceiling. What do I do?" Bruce asked Constantine, even as he watched Danny carefully. The boy's wiggling had become more intense. "You called me for that? That's not serious at all." Constantine grunted into the phone. "How was that not serious? He's wiggling a lot, and..." Bruce tried to explain next, only to be cut off. "Wiggling? Oh, he must be trying to grow an extra limb," Constantine commented, as if that was the most normal thing in the world. "He should be fine. If you want him to come down from the ceiling, you can always ask him. He can be a little intense without realizing it. As long as you don't mention how scared you are, you'll be fine." "What happens if I do?" Bruce asked cautiously, just to be certain. "Well, he doesn't take it very well," the other man explained. "Danny has been struggling with some, dehumanization issues." Bruce winced to himself, looking up at the boy with concern. "Have you talked to him like this yet?" Bruce explained that yes, he had. "Okay, that's fine. It just means he's comfortable around you to show this side of him." Constantine went on. "He has other powers that are less disturbing, but since he's small, he doesn't know how to use them. He needs to keep the edge off, since he's gotten so much power containing his tiny little frame right now. That's why he's growing an extra limb. Maybe two. It really depends on how he feels." "Good to know," Bruce remarked, with an arched brow. "Anything else I should worry about while we're talking here?" "Oh, yeah. If he eats anyone, don't worry. He's not actually digesting them. Just ask him to spit them out, and it should be fine. Constantine informed him. A crash cut him off. "All right, I gotta go. See ya, Brucey." Before Bruce could say anything else, Constantine hung up. Bruce wanted to believe the man was messing with him, but after the first time, yeah, Bruce was going to take this seriously. Jason hated to admit how fascinated he was watching Danny grow more limbs. It wasn't anything particularly graphic, but he couldn't deny he was slightly discomforted, seeing the way Danny's body convulsed once before 2 extra arms emerged from the hem of his shirt, pulling his shirt up in the process to accommodate the placing of the 2 new arms. Danny's wiggling now subsided as the boy adjusted to the new pair of limbs. Jason watched with morbid curiosity as Danny crawled around the ceiling, getting a feel for them. It was about this time that Alfred came in, bringing treats with him. Alfred hadn't seen Danny like this yet, but he took one look at the boy on the ceiling and simply raised an eyebrow, nonplussed. If the young sir would get down from the ceiling, perhaps he would like a cookie. The effect was immediate. Danny's pupils dilated, and the boy climbed down onto the wall in a record time. He perched himself on Alfred's shoulder, like a parrot, taking the napkin of cookie offered by Alfred with a pleased purr. Damian's eyes might as well have flashed red. He purrs. Not even an hour later, and Bruce received a text from Constantine saying, "Sorry, his sister made me give you her number." Almost immediately afterwards, Bruce got a call from an unknown number. With a sigh, he picked it up. "Hello, Bruce Wayne speaking." "Hi, this is Jazz. I'm Danny's older sister." Jazz, who sounded like a young woman, greeted Bruce kindly. "I saw him in that viral video and recognized him." "Really? You could tell without seeing his face?" Bruce asked with some amazement. He could recognize his children from afar as well, of course, but he felt like that was a different story altogether. "I practically raised that boy, believe me, I can tell," Jazz remarked with a dry laugh. "Is he all right? I'm worried about him." "He seems fine," Bruce told her, as he glanced over at Danny, who stayed happily perched on Alfred's shoulder. Bruce winced, wondering if he could tell her this. "Does he have another eye? Maybe another leg?" Jazz asked amusedly. Bruce sank in relief. "2 arms, actually," he chuckled. "He's on my butler's shoulder right now, if you want to talk to him." "Sure, just hold up your phone for him to hear," Jazz told him, and he did so. He didn't even get a chance to put it on speakerphone when Jazz called out, "Ground control to Major Tom. This is Lieutenant Jazz speaking. Are you there, Cadet Danny?" Danny perked up at the sound of her voice, crawling over an assortment of Bruce's children in order to get to Bruce. Bruce held Danny carefully in his arms as the boy held up the phone close to his face, clutching the device with 4 different hands, and said, "Hi, Jazzy." He listened in as the boy talked cheerfully with his sister. Over time, as the boy grew more relaxed, Bruce noted how the 2 extra limbs began to recede back into his skin. That seemed to do the trick. "I miss you too," Danny trilled as he was saying goodbye to his sister. "Love you." "Love you too, Danny," Jazz responded, and Danny purred happily, looking like a content kitten. Ignoring the more concerning aspects of all of this, that was downright adorable. After that, it seemed like everyone was trying to find ways to make Danny purr again. Duke, on the other hand, didn't really bother to try. It felt kind of rude in his opinion. Danny wasn't a cat, or a pet, or anything, after all. He didn't stop his siblings, of course, and just watched from the sidelines with a shake of his head. Danny was strange, but in a good way. There was an unnatural glow about him sometimes, and Duke could only assume he was the only one who could see it, seeing as no one else had made a comment about it yet. Duke wasn't sure how much of it he could cop up to the boy's still unknown powers, and how much was a side effect of whatever spell he had gotten himself caught up in. But Duke was fine to watch from afar. However, his resolve began to crumble when he saw the boy lounge in a circle underneath the sunlight streaming through the window. Although Danny had long since retracted his extra limbs, Danny now appeared to have transformed his legs into a tail, curling up in a folded circle, and rested his head against what used to be his thigh. Duke really didn't know about how his anatomy worked like this. He looked at the naga or something that Duke had seen from a manga and fantasy novels. It was actually pretty cute, oddly enough. Duke reached down to pat Danny on the head, only to freeze when the boy snapped his eyes open, pupils thinned into slits. Danny rose his head slowly like an alarmed predator. Duke dared not move, even as Danny leaned forward to sniff Duke's hand curiously. Holding his breath, Duke watched in amazement as Danny booped his own nose on the tip of Duke's longest finger, before resting his head back on his tail. Yet he looked at Duke expectantly. Tentatively, Duke began to rub Danny's head, earning a resounding purr that had Duke oohing in awe. If this were a competition, Duke would totally be winning. Things came to a head the following day. There was no more correspondence with Constantine, although Jazz had sent Bruce a number of texts detailing to him some things that he could do to ensure that Danny stayed healthy and happy. Bruce appreciated the tips, despite himself. Danny wasn't a fussy child, no matter how much certain behaviors of his perplexed his family. But they'd seen a great many things, and Danny wasn't dangerous, so they were content to fill his life with positivity to make sure it stayed that way. Bruce had been in the cave along with an assortment of his children. A few had already left for patrol, while Bruce discussed plans with the upcoming week with the rest. They still had no idea how long Danny would be staying with them, but they didn't want to leave him alone in the house for long. Alfred would be there, of course, but if one of them were injured or needed to get patched up, that made things a little more difficult. Ironically enough, their topic of conversation suddenly became very relevant when an alarm went off on the computer. Armed burglars had entered the manor. "See, Jack, what I tell ya? Yeah, you're so smart, Hack. I've seen in awe of your continued genius. Oh, shut your trap. We have work to do." Jack still didn't like this. While it didn't look like anyone was home at the moment, there was something eerie about the house. Were all rich people's homes like this when they weren't home? There was a part of Jack that wanted to bolt for the getaway car, but they were already here. He supposed it wouldn't hurt to grab a few things before leaving anyways. The two men quietly turned the corner and came to a complete halt when they saw a small child back to them, the tiny thing sniffling to himself in the corner. Hack, his moronic brother, glanced over at him and whispered, "Did we go up to him?" "What? Are you insane?" Jack shouted. "Have you never seen a horror movie in your whole life?" "You know I don't like horror movies," Hack reminded him with a roll of his eyes. "Yeah, well, you better start. You're about to be in one," Jack snapped back with a hiss. At once, the boy snapped into a standing position, causing both men to flinch and ready their guns. Jack grimaced as he heard the boy's bones snap into place, the child going ramrod straight before slowly turning like something out of a horror movie, turning to face them. His body did not move, but his head twisted around with sickening cracks. With his finger on the trigger, Jack could feel his entire body locking up against his will. The boy's eyes were glowing, a swirling green color. His face was practically skeletal, with strips of flesh only just clinging to the skull to create the illusion of cheeks. He was looking right at them. Jack wanted to run. He should be running, but he stood stock still, like a foolish prey, hoping for dear life that the predator would not strike. The boy opened his mouth, and just like that, the spell broke, and Jack turned tail and ran at the same time as his brother. Jack stumbled when he heard his brother yelp, and made the mistake of looking backwards to see a milky black substance snatching his brother by the ankles and dragging him back. He went to free Hack, but his strength was nothing in comparison, so he could only watch in horror as his brother was dragged into the boy's mouth, as if he was not 3 times the boy's size, swallowed whole. Jack bolted. Bruce, as Batman, could only frown at the numerous police cars and vehicles gathered around the manor's driveway. He'd already snatched one of the men, and he was hightailing it out the manor, but he had not yet found the other, which was strange, considering the computer had been very specific in detailing how many intruders were there. He said as much to Jim Gordon. There should be 2 of them. Jim hummed thoughtfully, turning to one of the other officers. "Did he say anything about a partner?" The officer winced and shrugged. "He said there was only 3 of them. Him, his brother, and the getaway driver. The other squad is already picking up the driver, who bolted as soon as he heard the police siren," the officer explained to them. Not a very good getaway driver then. But he says something about his brother being eaten by this little boy. Have you checked in with the man is on any kind of substance? Jim asked next. We'll get on it, the officer replied with a nod before walking away. I'll take care of this, Batman grunted to the police commissioner. He went to walk away when Jim said, I'll go with you. Batman glanced back at the man, one of his oldest friends. Are you sure? It's not going to be pleasant. Or at least, Bruce had the feeling it wouldn't be. Jim arched his eyebrow at him. I have already been around for a long time, Batman. I think I can handle it. Suit yourself, Batman remarked before heading into the manor. It didn't take a long time to find Danny, surprisingly. The boy was wandering about the halls, shaking his head every once in a while. When Bruce approached the boy, Danny snapped his head in their direction, eyes glowing a faint green. Bruce might not have been able to see Jim, but he could certainly feel the man's apprehension. Danny, Batman greeted to the boy. Voice softer, kinder. He wondered if Danny recognized him like this. It certainly felt that way. When Danny cocked his head to the other side and stared at Bruce in the eyes as if he could see through his soul. Did you eat a man? Danny nodded his head. Will you spit him out for me? Batman requested. Danny's face pinched. Danny, Batman began with a warning tone. He was going to hurt someone, Danny told him with a frown and a pout. I know, but there are people here who can stop him. Isn't that right? Batman asked, turning to Jim slightly, the man who had been growing more apprehension as the conversation went on. Nevertheless, the man readily replied, that's right, kiddo. We can take him away now. Batman turned back to Danny. The boy considered it for a moment and then another until finally he lifted his head skyward. Batman tried not to grimace as Danny regurgitated the man whole. Thankfully, there was no saliva or other liquid on the man. That didn't mean much, however, seeing the look of absolute horror on the man's face. Batman didn't recognize him right away. Perhaps a first-time offender, or maybe he wasn't from Gotham. Either way, Batman doubted the man would be trying this again for a long time. Good job, Batman commended Danny, patting him on the head while Jim gingerly handcuffed the regurgitated man. Danny smacked his lips with displeasure. He tasted funny. That's why we don't eat people. We don't know where they've been, Batman reminded the boy, who nodded his head with a serious expression. I don't get paid enough for this, Jim muttered under his breath. Constantine called, Bruce said as he gathered in the television room where his children were gathered. Danny seemed to have fallen into a fit of slumber, although thankfully Bruce knew the source of that. He said that he caught the witch, and the spell should be wearing off any minute now. Isn't it weird that I'm actually going to miss the little guy? Dick remarked with a sad pout, earning him a pat on the shoulder from Cass. That's not a surprise, Jason snorted in amusement, even though he didn't look all that happier, knowing Danny was leaving soon. He became a part of our lives, Barbara commented, with a sage nod of her head. Why wouldn't we miss him? The past few days have been fun, Duke admitted, a wistful grin on his lips. Damian remained conspicuously silent. Damian, how are you doing? Bruce asked his youngest kindly. Damian shot him a glare, only to look back at Danny, who had taken to resting his head on Damian's head during his nap. Danny had adored Damian, and Bruce was sure that they had been reciprocated, no matter what Damian might say in denial. Why wouldn't I be fine, father? Damian remarked in return. That hadn't been Bruce's question, but he knew better than to point that out. I knew this day would come. I'm not so foolish as to think. Danny purred in Damian's lap, cutting the boy off from whatever he'd been about to say. Shockingly, Damian's lower lip began to tremble before the boy forcefully stopped himself, crossing his arms over his chest in a huff. I'm fine. For Damian's sake, they would pretend that they believed him. Danny gave a strong twitch, and in that moment, everyone knew it was time. Bruce carried the boy to the floor, resting a pillow under his head. He didn't know how this would go, but he didn't want a teenage Danny to accidentally crush Damian, and he had no idea how much space Danny would need to grow older. They watched with bated breath as the boy began to practically vibrate in the air, getting thicker in the room. To their surprise, Danny lifted from the ground, back flat, as if he was possessed. Then, his form began to mutate. The lines on his skin and flesh blurred, save for a single spherical shape at the center. In a blinding flash of light that had everyone squinting, Danny's small form stretched and grew until it solidified into a teenager. But, instead of falling to the ground slowly, he dropped like a bowling ball and landed with a grunt. Danny was conscious immediately, whipping his head around in alarm, and stopping short when he saw them. There was only a vague look of recognition on his face, and Bruce belatedly realized that the teenager might think they kidnapped him or something. He certainly looked discomforted by their presence, and now Bruce wished Constantine could have been present for this. At least then, Danny would have had a familiar face. Danny scrunched up his face before regurgitating a gun. Bruce had forgotten about that. "What the F did I eat?" Danny asked them with a deep frown, holding the gun up in his hand. The tension fled from the room as everyone relaxed. Bruce took the gun from his hand to be given to the police at a later time. "Well, at least he grew up cute," Stephanie muttered to Cass, although she wasn't all that quiet about it. "Thanks," Danny remarked in confusion, stumbling to his feet unbalanced. Jason helped him stand up straight, and Danny went to thank him, only to stop abruptly. He frowned at Jason, squinting his eyes, and he said, "I think I remember falling asleep on you." There was a chorus of chuckles at Jason's expense, who smiled awkwardly, slightly abashed. "We've got pictures if you want to see it," Tim informed Danny with a wide smile. "How are you feeling?" Bruce asked the boy kindly, clapping him on the back. "Fine. A little like I got eaten and spit out," Danny explained, causing Damian to huff. "Ironic, considering what you did," Damian muttered with a slight sneer, but Bruce could tell the boy didn't have his heart in it. Nonetheless, Bruce sent the boy a warning look. "How long was I here for?" Danny asked this time, looking around the room in apprehension. "About 4 days," Dick told the teenager. "Constantine hadn't anticipated it would take this long, but we're happy to help out." Danny nodded slowly. Thanks, then? I didn't, do anything weird, right?" Danny looked incredibly panicked at the concept, causing the group to glance about themselves. The now teenager groaned, covering his face with his hands. The tips of his ears were red. "I am so sorry." "It is fine," Cass assured him with a smile. "Yeah, it was really cool once we got to get past the panicking phase," Duke told him, grinning. "None of us really knew what to expect," Barbara explained to Danny kindly. "Honestly, we kind of thought Constantine was messing with us." "That does sound like Constantine," Danny agreed with a slight lopsided smile. It was actually rather endearing, and something swelled in Bruce's heart to see how Danny had grown. Truly, the boy had grown into a fine young man. "Ah, good. You are awake." Alfred entered the room, offering Danny a warm grin. "Is the young sir hungry?" There was a smattering of chuckles. Danny was still young, of course, but he was nowhere near as young as he had been mere minutes ago. "I couldn't impose any more than I already have," Danny tried to deny, only for his stomach to betray him. His face lit up in another blush. "We're happy to have you," Bruce reassured the teenager. He received nods in agreement from his children as well. "Thank you," Danny told them, rubbing the back of his neck. "I have to be honest, I don't really remember much of it." "There isn't much to say," Damian drawled, already heading out of the room. "You were easily the cutest Eldritch Toddler I've ever seen," Stephanie commented with a smirk, smacking Danny gently on the arm. Danny remarked, arching a brow, "How many have you seen?" That got a few laughs. "Didn't I eat someone?" "Still cute," Dick crowed as he wrapped an arm around Danny's shoulders. "I heard you want to be an astronaut." "I said that?" Danny asked as Dick led him out of the room. "Yeah, I brought you an astronaut suit too. You were pretty adorable," Tim commented this time, making Danny sputter in embarrassment. Danny looked like he would very much like the ground to swallow him whole right about now, as if any of them would let that happen. Bruce might have already prepared the adoption papers, but that could wait a little longer. This concludes Eldritch Toddler by halfagone milkywxy, read by Insect Overlord. I thought this would be 2 parts, but it turned out it was only 1 part, so that's cool. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for listening.